In the fall of 1992, federal prosecutors charged a Pennsylvania millionaire with plotting to kidnap a DuPont heir. The plan needed a professional deprogrammer, a crew of ex-military men, and a 44-foot yacht waiting 60 miles offshore, beyond the reach of American law. The man they charged was the heir's own father. That is not a legend. That is a federal court case. And it is the final story in the strangest chapter of Fritz Springmeier's Bloodlines of the Illuminati. The chapter where almost every event is real, and the explanation is not. The DuPonts, Gunpowder for the War of 1812, the Powder Trust, General Motors. Nylon, a patriarch dead in a Louisville brothel. A poisoning accusation printed in Forbes, an heir declared incompetent for funding a book. Springmeier says the thread running through all of it is Satan. The family's own archive, 5 generations of it open to the public in Wilmington, tells a different story. 37 verdicts, 3 tiers of sources. Let us open the archive. The 4th family is DuPont. Like the royal houses of Denmark and of Britain, they are a dynasty with 2 faces. One is public, gunpowder, paint, nylon, the most famous name in American chemistry. The other is hidden, and it is satanic. The DuPonts control their own press coverage, better than the British Crown controls its own. Everything the public knows about this family, the family chose to let it know. Blood is the key. Few people grasp how much bloodline matters at the highest levels of Satanism. Blood carries the occult power, and unless a person carries the correct blood, he will never rise to the top. That is why these families marry their own cousins. The DuPont intermarried with the Balls, the Gardners, the Casanoves, families I have found in the thick of witchcraft, on purpose, to keep the power inside the blood. The first DuPont who can be tied directly to the order was Pierre Samuel Dupont de Nemours, a genius, able to translate Greek and Latin at sight by the age of 12. But the gift did not come from his father. It came from his mother, Anne Alexandrine de Montchenant, of an ancient noble line out of Burgundy, a medium with the spirit world. She taught the boy to be a medium too. It is quite possible it was her bloodline that gave the DuPonts their occult power, a bloodline that may reach all the way back to the House of David itself. This is a tribe, not a family. The DuPonts have always had a head, one man who rules by birthright the way a king rules. They hold a family council where even the women have the vote, and they own their property in common. I cannot yet prove which man it is, but I believe this. The most powerful DuPont in any generation may also be the one who serves, in secret, at the very top of Satanism. A dynasty of kings, a dynasty of Satan. Now the hard connections. Pierre Samuel built the dynasty in France, and during the Revolution, someone powerful hit him, because, I believe, he stood inside the inner satanic hierarchy. One protector we can name, Madame de Staël, daughter of the financier Necker, and intimate friend of Henri de Saint-Simon, who drew up the blueprint for a new world order. European unity, canals through Suez and Panama, a target date of the year 2000. And it was de Staël herself who saved his life during the terror. In 1800, he crossed to America and into the friendship of Thomas Jefferson, a key Illuminatus, I am convinced, a Grand Orient Mason of the Nine Sisters Lodge. Jefferson did the family the favor that made the dynasty possible. He arranged the first gunpowder order, a government order, the moment they went into powder on the Brandywine. The contract had saved the works. And it grew into a monopoly. In 1872, Henry DuPont pulled the rival powder makers into the Gunpowder Trade Association, the Powder Trust, and bought out the rest. Every war this country has fought since 1802 has been fought with DuPont powder. Then came the First World War, and the DuPont made a mint. With it they absorbed General Motors. Pierre Samuel DuPont II took its presidency in 1920, handed it to Alfred Sloan 3 years on, and kept the controlling stake. In the same years, the government seized the patents of the German dye trust and handed them to the DuPonts. And on those patents, they raised a chemical empire of nylon, rayon, paint, film, explosives, and drugs. Underneath the empire run the family secrets. In 1893, Alfred Victor DuPont, Fred, died in the most expensive brothel in Louisville, shot through the heart by a prostitute carrying the child he would not support. His nephew Coleman fetched the corpse with a hearse and paid the coroner to write effusive apoplexy on the certificate. The Courier-Journal's editor knew the truth and printed the lie anyway. Henry A. DuPont bought his way toward the Senate so brazenly it threw out his election in 1896 for vote fraud, yet he took the seat in 1906 anyway, because in Delaware the DuPonts wait an objection out. Alfred I built his cousin wife the most expensive house on the East Coast, the Nemours estate, $2 million in 1910 money, 400 acres, wrapped in a 9-foot wall set with broken glass along the top. That wall tells the truth about them. They live behind glass. The family works through proxies, and the key one today is the Jew Irving Shapiro, chairman of the DuPont Company on the boards of IBM and Citicorp, the go-between coordinating the Rockefellers and the DuPonts. Alfred I died in 1935. 50 years on, Forbes magazine printed the accusation out loud that his own widow, Jessie Ball DuPont, had murdered him. Her brother Ed Ball took the fortune, grew it past $1 billion, and became the most powerful man in Florida. And when one of their own turns against them, the mask comes off. Louis DuPont Smith, heir to $10 million, put $212,000 behind a book that named the powerful families as the hand behind the drug trade. His family had a judge declare him incompetent. Then his own father hired a motorcycle gang in black hoods and CIA-trained men to seize him and carry him 60 miles into the Atlantic on a yacht. Hold on to that yacht. What waited for Louis out there, and why a father would do that to his own son, is where this dynasty's true face finally shows, and we will stand on that deck before we are done. When he tried to charge his family, he lost the DuPont's own justice in this country outright. Now the smaller clues, and they gather like a tide, go back to 1829 and a sketch by Sophie Madeleine DuPont, a daughter of the house. In it, one of her own relatives is dressed as Satan, long paper horns, a tail, a costume, she wrote that December, mistaken for Old Nick himself. A children's game, the family would tell us, but this is a family that draws Satan from life. The DuPonts flew a beehive on white silk over their Brandywine militia, a Masonic emblem raised over a private army. And there is Alfred I and his dog. On a trip to Egypt in 1932, he found a stray he named Mummy and called his familiar spirit. "I have 1 or 2 more jobs for Mummy," he wrote, "then a vacation before I put her back to work." A grown man, one of the richest in America, writing of the magical powers of his dog. These are people who believe. Then there is the Society of the Cincinnati. An ex-insider handed me the name. It tied to the Illuminati, and the thread did not stop. Founded in 1783 by the Freemason Baron von Steuben, its eagle badge designed by Pierre l'Enfant, the same Mason who laid out Washington with its hidden occult patterns. Membership passed by heredity, binding the revolutionary families into a single aristocracy. Every president of the United States has worn its diamond eagle jewel, and almost no American has ever heard its name. The work goes on today. The DuPonts send their workers to a training center on the Pecos River in New Mexico, where the company stopped calling them employees and started calling them initiates, and poured the New Age gospel into the workforce. In Bad Homburg, Germany, they run a $20 million research center, spending on work so risky, the company admits it may never pay off. And I suspect I know what it pays for. The DuPont make the composite materials for our most secret aircraft, and I believe some goes into the parts for anti-gravity craft the public is never meant to see. After my first article on this family, one woman wrote to me her own mother-in-law, who works for the DuPonts in Pennsylvania, turned out to be a witch. Not a hag in a fairy story, a witch in witchcraft, a friend of the DuPont, protected by them, untouchable. That is the whole family in a sentence. They are not subject to the law of this country. They write it, they buy it, they wait it out, and when it comes for one of their own, they own the judge. They are above the law because, in the end, they are the law. This is the chapter where most of the named events are real, and that changes the job. Where Springmeier reaches the documented archive, we confirm it plainly, and the DuPont archive is deep. We measure the chapter against 3 sticks, the Hagley Museum and Library in Wilmington, which holds the corporate records, Joseph Fraser Wall's Oxford University Press biography of Alfred I, and Gerard Colby's DuPont dynasty. 5 verdicts are in play: confirmed, mixed, contradicted, unsupported, unfalsifiable. And the chapter ends on a yacht, 60 miles offshore, with the FBI listening. We get there last. Start with the founder. Pierre Samuel Dupont de Nemours, Springmeier writes, was the first DuPont who can be connected directly to the Illuminati. The record connects him to a great many things, and the order is not among them. He was a physiocrat, Quesnay's protégé, Turgot's Inspector General of Commerce, a member of the National Constituent Assembly, and the man who physically stood between the mob and Louis XVI at the Tuileries in 1792. His papers, every box of them, sit at Hagley, and no membership in Weishaupt's order appears in any of them. He was a Freemason. That much is true, and unremarkable, because virtually every Enlightenment intellectual in France was. Confirmed that he was a Mason. Unsupported that he was an Illuminatus. Then his mother, Anne Alexandrine de Montchanin, Springmeier writes, was a medium with the spirit world whose bloodline may tie to the House of David. The Burgundian minor noble background is real and documented. The medium and the Davidic line are Springmeier originals. No archive carries either. Mixed. The revolution nearly killed Pierre Samuel, and the chapter says Madame de Staël personally saved him. They were close. Hagley holds their correspondence, and James Marshall edited it in 1968. But what actually saved Pierre Samuel was the fall of Robespierre on the 9th of Thermidor, 1794, which emptied the prisons the terror had filled. The chapter inflates a real friendship into a personal rescue. Mixed. One claim in this stretch lands clean. Jefferson, Springmeier writes, arranged the first United States government gunpowder order for the family. He did. Those early federal contracts kept the Brandywine Works alive, and the Jefferson friendship is documented on both sides of the Atlantic. Confirmed. Now the machinery of power, and here Springmeier is mostly right. In 1872, Henry DuPont pulled the rival makers into the Gunpowder Trade Association, the Powder Trust, to fix prices and carve up the market. That is exactly what it was. Confirmed. What the chapter leaves out is the ending. The Justice Department sued under the Sherman Act in 1907, and a Delaware district court ordered the trust broken up in 1912. Hagley has the records. In the book's telling, the monopoly simply reigns forever. In the record, the government broke it. After the First World War, the chapter says, DuPont absorbed General Motors. It did. DuPont put roughly $25 million into GM in 1917, and the stake grew to about $49 million by 1919, enough to make it the largest single shareholder. Pierre DuPont became GM's president in 1920 and handed the wheel to Alfred Sloan in 1923. Decades later, the Supreme Court ruled that the stockholding violated the Clayton Act, United States versus E.I. DuPont de Nemours, 1957, and DuPont was forced to divest across the early 60s. Every piece of that is in the record. Confirmed. Then the patents, and here the tidy version phrase. The chapter says the American government seized the German Die Trust's patents and gave them to the DuPonts. The seizure is real. Thousands of German chemical patents taken under the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917 and held by the alien property custodian. But they were not handed to DuPont. The Chemical Foundation, created in 1919, licensed them to multiple American firms. DuPont was a major beneficiary, not the sole recipient. The single word given does the quiet work of turning a shared spoils system into a private gift. Mixed. The chapter opens its own case with a death. Alfred Victor DuPont Fred died in 1893, and Springmeier says he died at Maggie Payne's Louisville bordello, shot through the heart by a prostitute he would not support, with the family bribing the coroner to write, quote, effusive apoplexy. The telling is vivid. Fred's nephew Coleman fetching the body by hearse from Maggie's, carrying it to a brother's house, and buying the coroner's false certificate there. The newspapers of the day did report apoplexy. The brothel version is Louisville folklore, but it is not Springmeier's invention. It appears in Wall's biography and in Colby's DuPont dynasty, both of which treat it as plausible local lore. What cannot be independently re-verified is the Cincinnati Enquirer sourcing Springmeier leans on. The scandal underneath is real, the precise mechanics are folkloric. Mixed. The same section makes a cleaner claim about another DuPont. Henry A. DuPont, it says, was rejected by the Senate in 1896 for vote fraud and only seated in 1906. The outcome is right. The ground needs correcting. In May of 1896, the Senate refused to seat him because he had not received a majority of a legal quorum of the Delaware legislature. That procedural defect was the formal reason. The vote-buying wars of the era, the long addicts fight that left Delaware short of its senators, are the surrounding context, not the ruling itself. He won election properly in 1906. Confirmed. Alfred I built Nemours, and the chapter describes a mansion behind a 9-foot wall topped with broken glass. That wall is real, and visitors can still walk it. The estate was modeled on the Petit Trianon, opened in December of 1910, and the glass shards went up along the wall in 1915 and 16. The house is exactly as described. Springmeier's acreage is not. He gives 400 acres inside the wall and 2,000 beyond it, where the estate today runs to roughly 200. The wall is confirmed. The numbers are inflated. Confirmed on the estate. Then the accusation, which is the heaviest thing in the chapter and needs care. Springmeier says Jesse Ball DuPont murdered Alfred I in 1935, and that Forbes carried the story in 1985. A version of that is true. The Forbes 400 issue of October 28, 1985, ran an interview with Alfred's grandson, Alfred Dent, who accused Jessie and her brother Ed Ball of poisoning Alfred at his Epping Forest estate. But follow the sourcing. Dent had it from Ruth Latham Price, Ed Ball's ex-wife. Note the timing, too. The charge surfaced in 1985, 4 years after Ed Ball had died, and half a century after the death it describes, with both of the accused already in their graves. No investigation followed. No forensic evidence exists. No body was exhumed. The accusation is in print. The murder is not established. What is documented is the aftermath. Ed Ball built the Alfred V. DuPont Testamentary Trust into a Florida empire and became one of the most powerful men in the state. The motive is on the record. The murder is not. Mixed. The chapter's proxy is a man it calls, quote, the Jew Irving Saul Shapiro. Take the facts first. Irving Shapiro was chairman and chief executive of DuPont. He took the office at the end of 1973, formally in early 74, and held it until 1981. He was the first non-family chief executive in the company's history, and the first lawyer to run it, and he chaired the business roundtable. The chairmanship is fully documented. Confirmed. What Springmeier builds on it is not. He casts Shapiro as the, quote, go-between coordinating the activities of the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, and the Watson families, and points to his seat on the Council on Foreign Relations as though a board membership were a smoking gun. It is conjecture with no documentary spine. Shapiro sat on corporate and civic boards the way chief executives of his era did, the University of Delaware, a Jewish federation, several companies. That is a resume, not a hidden channel, unsupported. And then the word that is doing the real work. Springmeier does not write Irving Shapiro, or the chairman, or the lawyer. He writes, quote, the Jew Irving Saul Shapiro. The ethnic tag is not incidental. It is the argument. The thing the sentence wants us to feel is explained by naming what he was rather than what he did. Strip the label away, and the paragraph carries no evidence at all. That is the chapter's clearest anti-Semitic tell, and it is worth naming plainly and soberly, because the rest of the book runs on the same move. Here the fact-check turns inside out, because now we must add what the chapter leaves out. Springmeier, a man who hunts DuPont conspiracies for a living, never mentions the biggest documented one. In November of 1934, the Marine Corps Major General, Smedley Butler, testified before the McCormick-Dickstein Committee that a bond salesman named Gerald McGuire had approached him to lead a march of 500,000 veterans on Washington, a show of force financed, Butler said, in part by DuPont, Remington, and Morgan interests. The McCormick-Dickstein Committee was a real body of Congress, and its hearings are on the record. Its final report stated that such discussions had in fact taken place. No one was ever prosecuted, and historians still argue over how operational the scheme really was. Most treat it as genuine and probably amateurish, a plot with money behind it and no discipline in front of it. The DuPont thread is firmer than the coup. Irénée and Lameau DuPont were prominent backers of the American Liberty League, a well-documented anti-New Deal organization that spent heavily to defeat Roosevelt. The League is not a theory. It was an openly incorporated pressure group whose donor roles survive. That funding is not in dispute and never was. Whether the same men specifically bankrolled the alleged veterans, March is where the record thins out. So what we are left with is a documented league, a march testified to under oath, and a coup no court ever tested. The pieces are real, the finished conspiracy is not proven. Mixed, and none of it is in the book. It is the first of two stories Springmeier misses. The second waits at the end. This is the story the whole episode has been circling. Louis DuPont Smith, a DuPont heir, put $212,000 of his own money into printing a book called Dope Inc. His family, alarmed, had a court declare him incompetent to manage his own affairs. And then, in October of 1992, his father, E. Newbold Smith, and 3 others were charged with conspiracy to kidnap him. The plan was to seize Louis, hand him to the cult deprogrammer Galen Kelly, and hold him aboard a 44-foot yacht 60 miles off the Atlantic coast until he renounced his politics. There was an FBI informant inside the plot. Every strange, lurid element of it is real, and it was covered by the Washington Post and by Maureen Orth in Vanity Fair in April of 1993. Confirmed in its material facts. But we report outcomes faithfully, and the chapter does not. In January of 1993, Newbold Smith and his co-defendants were acquitted. The jury did not convict. Springmeier writes that the family owns justice in this country, and that this is why Lewis could not, quote, get his family on the conspiracy charge. The plainer account is that a jury heard the case and returned not guilty on every count. The plot was charged, the men were tried, they walked. One more thing rides on this. Dope, Inc., the book Lewis funded, Springmeier calls, quote, a good book. It is a publication of the Lyndon LaRouche organization, characterized across mainstream journalism as conspiracist, carrying anti-Semitic and anti-British themes and drug trade allegations against the British monarchy that no evidence supports. As a reliable source, contradicted. 3 occult exhibits in ascending order of ambition. First, a drawing. Sophie Madeleine Dupont sketched a relative dressed up, in her own words, with long paper horns and a tail, a costume she described as being mistaken for Old Nick. The drawing exists. Hagley has it. What it shows is a children's masquerade at an upper-class American house in 1829, the ordinary holiday mummery of the period. Confirmed that the sketch exists, unsupported as evidence of anything occult. Second, the Society of the Cincinnati, which Springmeier treats as the hidden aristocracy tying the families together. Almost every factual detail he gives is correct. It was founded on the 13th of May, 1783, at Baron von Steuben's headquarters. Henry Knox was its chief author. Pierre L'Enfant designed the eagle insignia, and Aidanus Burke's pamphlet that same year did denounce it as the seed of a hereditary aristocracy. George Washington was its first president-general. Where the chapter overreaches is the claim that every president has worn the diamond eagle. Only hereditary or honorary members wear it, and most presidents were neither. And there is no documented Illuminati link at all, confirmed on the history, mixed on the overlay. Third, Pecos River. Springmeier says DuPont sent its workers to a New Mexico center that renamed them, quote, initiates and calls it New Age Subversion. The Pecos River Learning Center was real, a corporate training outfit running ropes courses and trust, falls for Fortune 500 firms, DuPont among them, in the late 80s and early 90s. It has been criticized for the cultic edge of its group dynamics technique. It was not a cult, it was the ordinary strangeness of corporate team building. Mixed. One claim in the French material can be dismissed in a sentence, and it should be, contradicted. Madame de Staël did not run a, quote, salon/cat house. Her gathering at Capet in Switzerland was one of the most important literary and political salons in Europe. Benjamin Constant, the Schlegel brothers, the whole liberal opposition to Napoleon moved through it. It was not a brothel. Calling it one is not a finding. It is a slur with nothing behind it. Then Henri de Saint-Simon, and the chapter's most remarkable leap. Springmeier says the Saint-Simonians set the year 2000 as the target for the new order and called for, quote, the biological creation of a new androgynous humanoid, which he then identifies, in a parenthesis, as the small grays used to fly the saucers. Saint-Simon was a real thinker, an industrial utopian who anticipated European unification and the Great Canal projects. The Suez Canal genuinely was a Saint-Simonian enterprise, carried out by Prosper Enfantin's followers and Ferdinand de Lesseps. But the year 2000, the androgynous humanoids and the gray aliens piloting flying saucers appear nowhere in Saint-Simon. That parenthesis is the whole method in miniature. A real name, a real idea, and then a private jump to flying saucers set down as though it simply followed. There are interpolations, layered onto a 19th century economist, until he is unrecognizable, unsupported. And here is the second story Springmeier walks right past. In 1935, a company called Ethyl GmbH was formed to supply tetraethyl lead anti-knock fluid, the additive that made high-performance aviation and motor fuel possible, to Germany. Its American parent, the Ethyl Gasoline Corporation, was owned by General Motors and Standard Oil of New Jersey. DuPont controlled General Motors at the time, and DuPont manufactured the tetraethyl lead. Read the chain slowly. The family the chapter calls Illuminati kings had a real documented hand in fueling the German war machine in the years before the war. Technology sharing with IG Farben on synthetic rubber and other materials continued into the war era, and the cooperation ran on until Germany itself confiscated the American-held assets in September of 1943. Charles Hyam's Trading with the Enemy from 1983 and Gerard Colby's DuPont dynasty both lay it out. Confirmed. And here is the irony that ends the fact check. Springmeier, a man who finds a hidden hand behind every event of the 20th century, mostly leaves this one alone. The genuinely damning DuPont story, corporate, sourced, sitting in the published record, is the one he undertells. He reached for the small grays in the moon throne when the real thing was right there on the shelf. The Matrix. 37 verdicts, 5 labels, 4 minutes. The DuPonts as a top Illuminati bloodline, UNFALSIFIABLE. Pierre Samuel, DuPont de Nemours, an Illuminatus. Unsupported. He was a Freemason, like half the French Enlightenment. His mother, Anne de Montchenin, a spirit medium, mixed. The Burgundian nobility is documented. The seances are not. The bloodline of the House of David, unsupported. Madame de Staël saved Pierre Samuel from the guillotine. Mixed. The fall of Robespierre saved him. Madame de Staël ran a famous cat house. Contradicted. Capet was a salon, and the word is a slur. Pierre Samuel defended Louis XVI at the Tuileries. Confirmed. Jefferson steered the first government powder order to the Brandywine. Confirmed. Fred DuPont died in a Louisville brothel in 1893. Mixed. The scandal is real. The mechanics are folklore. 3 cousins bought the company for the family in 1902. Confirmed. The Powder Trust of 1872. Confirmed. The breakup of the Powder Trust in 1912. Confirmed. And ending the chapter skips. DuPont took control of General Motors. Confirmed. Pierre S. DuPont ran General Motors, then handed it to Alfred Sloan. Confirmed. The forced divestiture of 1957. Confirmed. A case the chapter never mentions. The German dye patents handed to DuPont. Mixed. Seized. Yes. Exclusively to DuPont. No Henry A. DuPont refused his Senate seat in 1896. Confirmed. The family council, with the women voting. Confirmed. Cousin marriages. The Balls, the Gardners, the Casanoves. Confirmed. Nemours and the glass-topped wall. Confirmed. With the acreage inflated. Jesse Ball DuPont poisoned Alfred I. Mixed. The accusation ran in Forbes. The murder was never established. Ed Ball, the most powerful man in Florida. Confirmed in substance. The DuPonts bankrolled the American Liberty League. Confirmed. A story the chapter never tells. The business plot of 1934. Mixed. Sworn to under oath. Never prosecuted. Never mentioned in the book. Irving Shapiro, chairman of DuPont. Confirmed. Shapiro, a Rockefeller proxy. Unsupported. And the ethnic framing tells on the author, not on Shapiro. Louis DuPont Smith. The book he funded, The Incompetence Ruling, The Kidnap Plot, confirmed every element. Dope, Incorporated called A Good Book. Contradicted. It is LaRouche literature. Sophie DuPont's devil costume sketch. Confirmed that it exists, unsupported as evidence of anything but a costume party. The Society of the Cincinnati. Von Steuben, L'Enfant's Eagle, The Hereditary Rule, confirmed. Every president wearing the diamond eagle, mixed, overstated. Pecos River as New Age subversion of the workforce. Mixed. Ropes courses, not rituals. Stephen Girard, Mason and Bank Director, confirmed. Lafayette's return to the Brandywine in 1825, confirmed. Saint-Simon's flying saucers and androgynous humanoids, unsupported. None of it appears anywhere in Saint-Simon. Anti-gravity craft in Bad Homburg, mixed on the laboratory, unsupported on the saucers. DuPont, Ethyl, and IG Farben confirmed. The one claim Springmeier never thought to make. The count, 20 confirmed, 9 mixed, 5 unsupported, 2 contradicted, 1 beyond any document's reach. Where this chapter touches the archive, it scores. Where it reaches for Satan, it comes back empty-handed. The DuPonts are the chapter where Springmeier comes closest to writing a real history book, and then chooses not to. Strip away the occult frame, and what the record shows is this. One family held a near monopoly on American explosives for a century. It married cousin to cousin, generation after generation, to keep the capital inside the blood. It ran its home state's politics so thoroughly that a DuPont sat in the Senate seat the family had once been refused. It bought control of General Motors and lost it to a federal antitrust ruling. Its executives helped supply, through Ethyl, the anti-knock chemistry that Hitler's Air Force needed, while its own company files show it knew exactly who was buying. It bankrolled the American Liberty League against the New Deal and stood accused before a committee of Congress of flirting with a plot to remove Franklin Roosevelt from power. And within living memory, it produced a father who stood trial for conspiring to seize his own son and hold him on a yacht past the edge of American jurisdiction. Every clause in that sentence sits in an archive that any of us can visit, and half of it, the Liberty League, the business plot, the Ethyl contracts, Springmeier never mentions at all. That story is darker, stranger, and better documented than anything the chapter invents. But Springmeier does not trust it. He reaches, instead, for a medium grandmother carrying the blood of the House of David, a masquerade sketch promoted into devil worship, flying saucers smuggled into the philosophy of Saint-Simon, and around the one Jewish executive in the whole story, he hangs an ethnic label and lets it do the work an argument should have done. That pattern has a name, and it is older than this book. It is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, with the family name changed. When the chapter keeps to the public record, it is mostly right. When it reaches for the supernatural, the record goes silent, and the silence is the verdict. Next, the Freemans and the Merovingian bloodline of Jesus Christ, a genealogy that has been a documented hoax for almost exactly 70 years.